Hello, and welcome to this session on anti-money laundering. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Marta Mihaly, and I'm the head of AML. I have over 10 years' experience in anti-money laundering and sanctions, covering banking, asset management, and most recently, the insurance industry. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be with you in person today due to unforeseen circumstances, but I'm still really keen to take this opportunity and share with you some AML insights, especially when it comes to high net worth customers. So what I've done is recorded my presentation for you, which you'll be watching now. And after that, I'll be calling in on a video conference so that we can discuss and I can answer any kind of questions that you might have. So while you're watching these videos, please, one, try and stay awake. I know that this is an unusual way to deliver a presentation, and the topic, although it's interesting to me, I know that it might not be the same for everyone else. And two, as you're watching the videos, please just jot down any questions that you may have so that we can talk about them when I call in later. So today's session can mainly be broken down into three parts. I'll be covering, firstly, a recap of what anti-money laundering is, what terrorism financing is, and what sanctions is, some of the definitions, and why it's important for us to know these risks and to comply with the requirements that are set for us. Secondly, and I think this will probably be the most interesting part of the session for you today, is I'll want to talk about what high risk is in terms of anti-money laundering. So I'll cover with you what are those aspects or features of a customer's relationship that we look at that might indicate that they're higher risk from an AML perspective, and then what do we do in order to mitigate that. And then also, once you understand that, the ways that we can work together to make the customer's experience more seamless and get the whole AML approval process done more effectively and efficiently. And then lastly, we're also going to touch upon a very important aspect of AML and your personal role and responsibilities in terms of reporting any suspicions and how you can do that. Great. So I'll start off by just recapping what money laundering is. I know that you would have already done a e-learning module and read on what AML is, what red flags there might be, but let me just recap that and some of the definitions, because I know that going through and clicking through an e-learning module is not always the most effective way of explaining something to someone. So I'll touch upon what money laundering is, what terrorism financing is, and what sanctions is. They're all related, but just some differences between all of them. So I'll talk about money laundering first. So money laundering, in my own words, sorry, is basically when a criminal has done a crime and made money out of it. And what they try to do is then lie about where they got their money from so that they can use it to their own benefit and reap the rewards of the crime that they did. So you'll be familiar with the three stages of money laundering, which are placement, layering, and integration. And these terms all sound kind of sophisticated and serious and important, but basically they're quite simple if you explain them in simple terms. So we'll take an example of Mr. Daniels, let's say Mr. Jack Daniels, who is a director at a very successful alcoholic beverage factory, And let's imagine that Mr. Daniels has been stealing some of the company's most prestigious bottles of whiskey, and he's been selling it on the streets to people that he knows for a good sum of money. So imagine he has all this cash from illegally basically stealing the company's products and selling them on the street. So he's got all this cash, and he goes into his bank account. Sorry, he goes into his bank and places the money into his bank account. So that is placement. And then once it's in his bank account, he uses that money to, let's say, buy an insurance product. And then within the free look period, he changes his mind and he surrenders the policy. But he asks that the money goes to his other bank account in another bank. So that's layering, basically distancing, trying to distance the money from where it originally came from by putting it through many different channels in the financial sector. And then once it's in his other bank account, he uses that to buy himself a luxury yacht, which he cruises around Singapore every weekend. And that will be integration, so using the money that he made by way of a criminal activity to now use it to purchase something for himself. So it's not cash anymore that he made from selling the expensive bottles of whiskey, it's now a luxury yacht. So basically that's the gist of what those three steps in money laundering are. And this is just the most simplest terms. There are very complex ways to launder money as well, but as long as you know the basics, that should suffice. So then let's move on to what terrorism financing is. Terrorism financing is a bit different from money laundering, because when we look at money laundering and what us AML professionals also, the one main thing that we ask ourselves when we're looking at any case is, where's the money coming from? So when we talk about AML, it's the source of the money that's the most important thing. Like in the example of Mr. Jack Daniels, where did that money that he put into the financial system come from? How was it made? How did he accumulate his wealth, basically? And that's why it's important, especially when we deal with high net worth customers, that we understand where their money is derived from. And we're going to talk about that later in the next segment when we talk about what kinds of due diligence we do when a customer is higher risk, especially when it comes to source of wealth, and what kind of documents we can get to make ourselves comfortable that indeed it is where they got their money from. So, sorry, back to terrorism financing. That's a little bit different, because while we care about where the money's coming from when it comes to money laundering, in terrorist financing, we're looking at where the money's going to. So what we're concerned about as a player in the financial sector is that we're not used to send money to any terrorist or terrorist organization for them to fund their terrorist activities and carry out some gruesome actions. And then finally, and also linked to that, will be sanctions. Sanctions lists are basically blacklists that have been compiled by either countries like the US or the UK, or a group of countries like the UN or the EU. And it's basically a blacklist which they've pulled together to say that they don't want anyone in the financial industry dealing with these people. That's usually because the people listed on this blacklist will be known terrorists, known criminals, known money launderers. So so there, so we cannot deal with those persons. In addition to that, some countries also use sanctions as a tool as a political tool. I'll give you an example. The US and Russia, as we know, are not really the best of friends, and the US has put in place some sanctions against Russian companies and Russian high-ranking government officials, meaning that any company that is in the US or companies that deal with US dollar currency would not be allowed to send or receive money from those people. So it's important that we also make sure that our customers are not sanctioned persons. So sorry, let me just stop here because we're going to go to the next video. All right.